Okay, hello, welcome everyone to Let's Talk About College Academic Stress. I'm Bhante Sanathavihari, and I'm joined by Stephanie.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about so many different things, but before we talk, I'm just going to throw up the slide so we stay on schedule. And Stephanie, I don't know if you want to just say hello.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie. So glad to be with you all today, and I'm really excited to teach you all about some tips that I've gathered along the way about college, the college experience, and yeah, and I'll definitely go into some background in terms of my education, but just a little tidbit. I am a therapist currently, and so there's a lot of school that brought me here, and so I'm happy to share that with you all today.
Nice. All right. So here's a lovely overview that Stephanie did for us right here.
So today, just to give you all a little background on why we're here. So we just wanted to really discuss just kind of like general overview about like all things college, and things that maybe like we don't hear typically in like a school orientation, where everybody's talking about like, the first day or, what to look out for, just like, normal college tips, I guess you could say. But more so based off of like the experience, and I think like some of these things are things like I wish I knew and like was taught. And I think like especially being a first generation college student, it was very challenging, like, going into college and not knowing what to expect and wondering if I would, make it. And like so, both of us today will be sharing a lot of um our personal experiences as well as some tips based off of that as well. And um, yeah, a lot of it is, things that we wish we knew and were taught, and, and sometimes we get our advice from those around us, like our classmates or friends, family, and that can be very confusing. And so we wanted to really provide a kind of like a comprehensive, like, presentation to introduce a more like balanced approach to a college. And things can feel overwhelming, and so just to kind of step back, zoom out a little bit, and to be able to kind of see it from a different lens. And so today we're going to talk about like different topics like academic stress, like work-life balance, and just some other tips on like how to like maintain like um, overall wellness while you're in school, working, all those things. So yeah.
Yeah, so why are we here? You know, for me, it's really about like trying to respond to the needs of the young people that come to the temple, to the viharas, right? Like there's all the time, they're very concerned about their future education, or they're concerned about what's going on in the university, especially their parents, right? Like they mostly come to the temple because their parents want them to get some help about like how to manage the college situation. So for me, this is just like a natural response to what I hear all the time. All the time, every year, I see the kids getting ready to prepare to apply for college and applying for student loans. And then like in the summer, in that weird zone, like where they're excited but they're scared to go to college, and the parents are also excited and scared, right? And the parents are like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do. It's like don't. Not too many you should do's, a lot on the negative, right? And Bante tell them about all the bad things and stuff like that. So that's been happening for the last 8 years. So I was like, well, it's about time maybe that we do a more comprehensive overview about this experience instead of reactionary, right? Like something happens, then we talk. So let's be a little bit preemptive and let's set the stage up. And I love these kids. I've seen some of these kids start in middle school and now they finish like university, or some of them I saw them going into university and now they're finishing up their master's degree. So it's really been a journey seeing these children and now young adults going through this entire experience, and it's just so amazing, and I just want to help them to the best of my ability. And a little bit about my background, I'll be very honest, like I wasn't a good student in high school, I had to I was a super senior, so I had to do an extra year. And even after that, I still had to do, on top of that extra year, another summer because I was missing 2 classes even after that extra year. But somehow, some way, once I got into community college, I became a B student. And then after I transferred to a 4-year university, I became straight A's, basically. I was on the honor roll, so I graduated with honors. And then I just recently finished grad school where also I was a straight A student, and I did many things. I was like a TA. I did 2 different research uh, studies, and I was like, wow, look at that transition where I went from like failing super senior, held back, kind of like mediocre student in community college, going to honor roll student, for my bachelor's, and then like doing all these extra things on top of my master's degree that just add more pressure. And I was able to thrive in it and still get straight A's doing those 2 projects and being a TA. So I also want to speak to those kids or those people who are in university who might not be meeting expectations, right? And it's not too late. Like, it's not the end of the world. If you fail one class, parents, it's not the end of the world for your kids, okay? Even if they take a semester off or they take a year off, it's not the end of the world, It's not the end of the world. But what do we do at that time, right? If we're going to take time off, then we should focus on self-care. It shouldn't just be time wasted. Maybe we can do other things, explore hobbies. So there's other ways that we can work with these, so-called setbacks, where we can turn them into something else. Or maybe even time just to connect with the family and talk about the things we haven't been talking about for so long. So these are some of the inspirations, like some of the things that brought me here. My own experience, I think, is very important, because sometimes we think like, well, everyone's an amazing student, and Stephanie and Bhante are talking about this because they were amazing. They're perfect students the whole time. So it's very easy for them to talk about this. Like, no, we were not perfect students, We had our struggles, and we had a lot of pressure from society and our family. And I think that's also another thing that we need to share with the kids, that the reality of all these pressures that are out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing that. And actually, I have a very similar story too. It wasn't smooth sailing for me either. And a lot of my, so yeah, high school was a bit rough for me as well. And then I actually, because I was the first in my family to go to college, I started off at community college. So I went to Santa Monica College, actually. Was there for a few years, and then transferred over to UCSD, San Diego. And so there I studied psychology and did my bachelor's there, and really enjoyed it. But I was like going through a period of like confusion, like so much confusion, stress, anxiety, just like trying to figure out like what direction I wanted to go, like, and I was really passionate about psychology, which is why I chose that major, but I was actually trying to pursue a career in medicine. And that was more so because of like what I thought I should do. And it was like not exactly, it was something I was passionate about, but at the same time, it was like I felt like I was just trying to force it more than anything else. And then through taking all these science classes and then not doing well in them, I realized very quickly that that wasn't what I wanted to do. And then so I actually just continued on with what I was studying originally. And yeah, and then after that, I did some work in I just worked for a few years, worked in clinical research. I actually got a phlebotomy license. It was super random, but because I was still trying to make it work with medicine, and then I realized, no, this is not, I'm not doing this. I could do the work, but I wasn't passionate about it. And so I think a lot of, what we want to share today is like, side note is that sometimes there's gonna be detours, and the detours were actually my best friend at the end of the day. And I'm actually now looking back really grateful for the detours, because if I didn't have those, like I wouldn't have pursued what I'm doing today. And so, all the trial and error, going into um, different environments where I was like exploring like the medical field and stuff like that, I was able to then see like, okay, like this is great, but it's just not for me. Um, and then I actually pursued my master's degree at USC in social work, and so I wanted to pursue therapy, and so I'm a clinical social worker currently. And so yeah, like it took me down that path, and I think like what was really hard for me like throughout that whole journey was just like the confusion, the anxiety, feeling alone, feeling lost, and feeling like I was wasting time, and just feeling like all the detours were not going to lead to anything. And I was just going to keep wasting time and just not get to a destination, and then maybe like just be, you know, confused forever. That's what it felt like, So, and it's like, it's just this like existential crisis feeling, which that's what I felt. It was not fun. And I really, I've heard a lot of, young people in our community mention stuff like this, and I like to reassure them that, the detours are okay. Like you can take some time sometimes to like take a step back and to maybe explore a little bit, maybe talk to people that are in the field, maybe um shadow intern, maybe just take a moment, and also a big part of it is like self-care and taking care of yourself along the journey. And if we neglect that, it can be really harmful in terms of how long we can keep going on the journey in general. So yeah, so that's my journey, and I'm really glad, for the detours. Let's just say that.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Stephanie. Yeah, I changed
Yeah.
majors 3 times. It was like a mess, you know.
Yeah. I was experiencing a little bit of that too.
Yeah, so we're get started first with like academic stress because I feel it's like such a big thing. Mental health, right? We're coming out of the pandemic. We're seeing some of these numbers. Um, so much pressure that I've seen. I think this is the number one thing that I really trust in kids. They're smart enough to figure out like FAFSA and figure out their what they need for their major and all this stuff. But we don't really have like very good emotional intelligence or how to deal with emotions or how to deal with our mind. So I really want to focus, on this. I want to dedicate a big part to academic stress, and not only like from studying, but the pressure to study or the pressure to perform well. Academic stress really is just a word that we're using to encompass the whole kind of like university kind of college experience, is the stress that comes with it. So what is academic stress? Academic stress is defined as the student's psychological state resulting from continuous social and self-imposed pressure in a school environment that depletes the student's psychological reserve. So that could even be like pressure to go out and party with your friends, right? Pressure to dress a certain way to fit in with everyone else in school, right? Pressure to have like the new iPhone like everyone else has on campus. It can look many different ways. It's not only about like having good grades, right? And things like that. So it's just kind of a stress that arises due to the entire world that you're living in, right? Within that context. So I just want to share a few statistics in the next couple slides, and then it'll get more interesting when we get into the dialogue. But I think it's important to know some of the facts, right? Research has found a statistically significant correlation between perceived academic stress of university students and their mental well-being, right? So stress is very subjective, right? It's not like we can measure it objective. What I find stressful might not be stressful to someone else, and what they find stressful might not be stressful to me. So it's a very subjective thing. Sometimes we might say, well, like that person's not really going through anything difficult. Well, we don't know that, right? Like it could be something that for us might be very small, but for that person, it's their whole world. So it's very important that we notice that stress is a subjective experience, right? And that subjective experience affects people's well-being, mental health. This relationship was most apparent among gender and grade levels. Much specifically, people, non-binary second-year students experience greater academic burden and lower psychological well-being, right? So people that are non-binary gender conforming and second-year students, right? We usually think like, oh, wow, first year is like the most stressful. It turns out that it's not, right? At least for when it comes to mental health, it's the second year, right? And we would think also the last year, right? You're trying to get everything done and you're looking for your work, but not this. I think this is a kind of like a kind of hidden population that we haven't really focused on. I think in the beginning, at the end, we kind of feel intuitively that these people go through more difficulties, but it turns out that it's second-year students. During 2020 and 21 school year, more than 60% of college students met the criteria for at least one mental health problem, right? So more than half, right? For various reasons. Like I said, it's not always because of studying. It might be things just going on in regular life, right? But within this context. So imagine like you lose someone, or you have a relationship breakup, or you can't afford like car payments. Add that to your normal academic stress, like your threshold is way lower, right? So it's going to be something that in other contexts, or for someone else that might be very easy to manage, will kind of be exaggerated or take it to another level when you're in this kind of high pressure environment. So we don't know exactly, what's taking is causing this 60% statistic, but we can just imagine like normal life is a big part of it too. But within this kind of setting, it just makes things more difficult. Another national survey, almost 3/4 of students responded moderate to severe psychological distress, right? So 3/4. So we're talking about we're talking about 75%, right, of students reported some sort of moderate to severe psychological distress. So the majority, right? In either case, the majority of students are going through some sort of psychological distress or some sort of mental health struggles or difficulties. Health issues for college students have piled up even more during the pandemic. So we're still kind of in it, right? Like some parts of the world, like even right now when I came to like Cambodia, there's still a lot of worry about COVID, especially in like primary school education, and people are still wearing masks. So we're not completely out of it yet, right? Maybe in the US we feel, but if we take kind of a larger view of what's going on in the world, I mean, it's still with us and it will always be with us. Students were over twice as likely to rate their overall mental health as poor, right? So during the kind of the pandemic years, we saw an increase in self-reported mental health difficulties. Looking for a student, looking just as students who access mental health counseling prior to college, 70% selected fair or poor. That same grim number applies to LGBTQI plus students and students identifying as lower socioeconomic. So here we see again this particular group, like non-binary, right, being affected more severely than what we consider like the normal group of people. And all of these kind of other things like low socioeconomic status, maybe a minority within a minority kind of groups. Anytime you get in a kind of a smaller, more unknown minority, it seems like all these other factors make it more difficult for these people, right? And that also shows up in mental health. Even among the 205 respondents who did not say they'd experienced any 7 common mental health challenges among college students asked about in the survey, 12% rated their mental well-being as fair, right? So even among the ones who didn't necessarily say they were going through something like very difficult or they had poor mental health, they asked them about how's your mental health. They're like, like it's fair. It's like, it's okay, right? So people are not really thriving, or they don't feel very happy. They're just kind of like in survival mode, even the ones who don't really feel like their mental health is very that severe. And another thing that we have to acknowledge about the college experience is this is the time where many people experiment, right, with substances like drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, vaping's very popular. And we got to be honest, this kind of opioid addiction, right, that's going on in our country, it's everywhere. And college students are not exempt from this, from falling victim to these type of drugs. So I think it's very important that we talk about drugs. And I've noticed the parents always talk about drugs too, the warning, right? Like, oh, you're going to go to college, there's going to be drugs there, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to talk about it. So substance abuse is unfortunately common among college students and can result in a range of academic, physical, mental, and social problems. One study found that nearly half of participating college students met the criteria for at least one substance use disorder, right? So it's not a small number. I remember my college days, alcohol was everywhere, like, and drugs were everywhere, even in the classroom, right? It's not like it's something that people do in their rooms. People go out to places and do it, and So it's part of the culture too, right? People kind of expect it. Like, I'm going to college, I should party and drink and do all these kind of things. And, I really feel that I'm going to leave it up to you, however you want to manage your life, but you should be aware of these things. So we're just going to present the information, and however you choose to live your life, that's up to you, but you should be very aware of the dangers of participating in these kind of activities. And yeah, see what's up for you. We don't want to be someone just going to be like, oh no, that's very naughty. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. I trust in your own intelligence and wisdom to experiment and find out what's going on. Common causes of drug use for college students, right? So why would someone want to try drugs, right? High levels of stress. High levels of stress. It's used as a coping mechanism, but using drugs usually affects your sleep. It affects your mental clarity. It might provide some relief from the stress, but then you're going to get more stress from losing some of your ability to perform well, right? So you get more stress, so you do more drugs. You get more stress, and you see how can this, it's kind of like a snowball effect that takes over after some time. So just the levels of stress that come from performing in an academic setting, your social life, the pressure from your parents, right? And classmates to do well. How's everything going? You should get good grades. Your cousin in this other university, she's getting these grades and you're not. We know how people love to compare their children to other children, right? All that kind of other things, or family concerns. Something's going on at home. You're not living at home. You feel stressed out because you can't help your parents or your mom in the way they used to. So that might lead some people to try to alleviate some of that suffering, some of that stress by trying some drugs. Social reasons, right? Peer pressure. Just like in high school, peer pressure doesn't go away. College peer pressure, I think, maybe gets worse to some extent. So peer pressure can be one of the factors. Family history of substance abuse. We know this is a reality. We can't be quiet in the Buddhist and Sri Lankan Buddhist community. We know that drinking problems is something that's there. And if you saw that your parents dealt with problems by drinking, you might also resort to the same thing, right? Beliefs about substance use, right? You might think that everyone drinks, it's not a big deal. Everyone's vaping. Marijuana, it's legal now, right? Like it has nothing to, it's nothing wrong. So you may not know the dangers, right? You might see it as it's been very normalized. So that might be another reason that people might try it. Being part of fraternity, a sorority, a club, whatever kind of group, right? Social groups also kind of meet in certain places. Let's meet at a bar. Let's meet at my house. Let's do karaoke. Karaoke is a place where usually there's alcohol, right? Even if the place has no alcohol, somehow alcohol ends up in there. So being part of groups also can be a reason for people to drink. Poor academic performance, right? If you're not doing too well, you might try to cope by using substances. And you know what? Going to college is weird. It's a weird time. Like you might feel stressed out with all these changes, maybe even physical changes in your body. People are still developing. Maybe you're fitting in, a change of physical location, a change of friends, all these different changes that are going on. And that might also cause you to feel very stressed out, uncomfortable. And you might try to experiment and, to cope with all this pressure from all these changes. And another one is just how easily available, right? You don't even have to buy them. People will give it to you for free. That's what I remember in college. Alcohol for free, marijuana for free, ecstasy for free, all these different drugs for free, especially if you're a girl. Let's be honest. Girls have more access to these things for free. You don't have to buy them. So just ladies, be a little bit extra careful, especially about like if you are to receive drugs, that you trust the person who's giving them to you, right? People might alter them or might tell you it's a certain type of drug, and it's really not that substance. It's something else, right? Like all these kind of sedating drugs, right? To unfortunately, that some people use to abuse others, right? Usually they're called like date rape drugs and stuff like that. So that's also an extra danger that's compiled on top of this for women who do choose to use drugs. They might actually be given something that they didn't think they're taking, right? So we have to be very careful about that too. All right, personal experiences.
And Bante, actually, I wanted to add something
Okay.
to that slide. I love what you said there, and I think that like another thing is like all the information we're providing here about like substances is not to bring up like a sense of fear and like, and more so education, so that we don't, so that we know how to feel prepared, because these things do come up. It's kind of unavoidable, and I mean, I experienced it in school, and I just knew my boundaries, my limits to say no. And a lot of times, yeah, there is that pressure, that social pressure, you know, and people are like, oh, like stop being boring or whatever, you know. But you know, it's about like just us having this sense of awareness and using this information to more so help us to feel more confident in ourselves and to, you know, set the boundaries when needed. um and not to really like bring up a sense of fear that like, you know, the whole environment is scary and we need to like, you know, dodge a lot of like all these, you know, things that are going to come at us, you know, these pressures that are going to come in our way. And so it's more so just so that we can feel like a sense of yeah, awareness and education about it. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
All right, take it away again.
So I guess I'll start with this one. So personal experiences. I've mentioned some things before, but I have a few more to add there. In terms of the college experience, oh man, I wish I could do a redo, but then at the same time, I'm okay with the way I did it because I think it led me to where I needed to go, and you know, I have all these things that now I can share today, which is awesome. So, and so some things that I, you know, thought when I came into college, honestly, it was a bit of a naive type of mindset. I want to say more so when I started like uh, college at UCSD, and that was like my first time living away from home. So I was in San Diego. I was like 2.5 hours from home. And so that was different. And luckily, I did have a friend, who like I had known from community college. She's actually Sri Lankan too. And so it kind of felt nice to have, you know, that one person there that I knew, but at the same time, there was still a lot of like, you know, personal like navigation that I had to figure out in terms of the college experience. And so like for me, um, I kind of came in with that like not expectation, perspective of like, oh, you know, I'm a nice person, I'm positive, like, you know, I know sometimes drama can happen at colleges, and you know, roommate stuff and all this whatever. And so like if I'm, you know, just being cool with everybody, I shouldn't have any problems or issues or anything like that. And then it turned out to be the complete opposite experience. And there was just a lot of, you know, like living with it was myself and 5 other girls in one dorm room space, and so it was a lot of drama. You know, people were just, you know, creating, you know, people get stressed and take it out on others, stuff like that, you know. And so there's just things that I think like I wasn't really prepared for in terms of that. um and I think that like coming in with the mindset of like, um you know, there are going to be different types of people here in college, and like, you know, everybody responds to stress differently, and I think that's what I wish I knew better. Which is that like, and I feel like I did in some to some degree, but when you're in it, it's a whole different experience. And also like I felt like I wasn't the best at setting boundaries back then. um and like speaking up, or you know, saying if something was bothering me. And so I think like a lot of times it's like just knowing who you're surrounded by, you know, and keeping, you know, like your own thing going on, taking care of your self-care, and also, you know, while you have social time, having that time for yourself too, to recharge, which I feel like I didn't do as well as I would have liked. And really just, you know, kind of, you know, stayed with my friends and all that, which is great. But I think like sometimes when I wanted to go and branch out and do my own thing, which is usually what I like to do, there was that feeling of like, you know, this collective way of doing things. You know, everybody does this thing together, you know, and everybody's kind of like, it's like almost like a codependent group relationship, but it's like, you know, college, everyone's trying to figure things out and everybody feels like anxious and whatever. But I think I wish I kind of set some better boundaries when it came to stuff like that. Like if I was going to go to the gym, I'm going to stick to going to the gym versus like deciding to do something else, you know, and then paying for it later, feeling tired or whatever. And then some other things I wanted to highlight were just like the sense of like glorifying the like the burnout and like working hard all the time. I definitely did that. No, oops, sorry, dropped my charger there. A lot of my friends and I both, we would stay up late till like early hours of the morning, and we thought we were cool, and just like studying and studying, and honestly it was not productive, it was not helpful, because a lot of the stuff would not be retained, and like we were just tired, and it just carry on to the next day. And so I think there's like a lot of that. I don't know, depending on the school too, but I feel like a lot of college campuses, especially if you're like living there, like we can have um kind of a issue with separating school from like life, and then we get stuck in that bubble of like feeling like school has to be life all the time, 24/7, and almost feeling guilty when I didn't study, or when I wasn't like as productive, because I felt like I had to be consistently doing that. And it just came from just like the pressures like around me, and just feeling like that's just what I should be doing. And so there's that kind of sense of like, sometimes we feel the sense of pride in like stating to other students like, well, yeah, I studied till this time, and I'm so tired, and I'm just like exhausted, and but this is college, this is how it is, and I think like we want to encourage changing that narrative, and like kind of adopting a more balanced way of handling things, and realizing that actually it's not productive to have that other way of doing it, and that like it ends up being worse for us at the end of the day. So yeah, and the other little things are just wishing I kind of just took care of my mental health a little bit more, um, and like just the anxiety and stuff like that. And I think just like joining maybe like a consistent like activity type of group that's like outside of school, so that way I could have that sense of separation. And so yeah, I think just like any type of thing that I feel like maintains your sense of individuality while you are in the school, allows you to like learn more about yourself on the side while you are still learning about yourself in the group, you know interacting with people and different personalities, but also having like your own thing going on the side too. I think, like, to summarize it all, like that's what I would say is the best thing, just kind of having that separation. And so time management and autonomy. So there's that question, that how do I adult question. So we want to balance things out, right? Like we were talking before, and that can be challenging sometimes. How do we balance self-care, school, work, social life, right? Everything. And I think we need to take that into account. Like we're not just going for school. Like there's that element of social life, and maintaining that relationships, or just whatever. um and so I think a key thing here is like you know figuring out like what works for you, and what works for you might not work well with somebody else, and I think like just noticing too, if we're saying yes to too many things that maybe we want to say no to, and sometimes we might just say yes because we might feel peer pressured, or feel this sense of like, well, I have the time and all that. But I think sometimes we want to just take a step back and just think about it and see, like, does that work with my schedule, and do I still have time for like self-care and getting my work done and stuff like that. And then if I have extra time, I can also take some time to like have a little fun and take a break, and I that's super important too, social having that social interaction is key. We don't want to get too isolated and too just stuck in the books, so really finding that balance. And like I said before, like sometimes we can feel this pressure to want to do it one way, like everybody's like, oh, just get a planner. And like a lot of times we like watch these like YouTube videos where people are talking about like, oh, hello everybody, this is my morning routine, and they're just like, and then I watched a lot of these videos, tried them, and then ended up really frustrated because I couldn't do it. But a lot of times I think it's really just not trying to put ourselves into a mold, and maybe taking some tips from that. It can be beneficial to have a morning routine. I don't think that's like a bad thing. I think it's actually really great. There are many benefits to waking up early and starting the day early, and kind of having that time for self-care before the day starts. So like before, we get into our responsibilities and are looking at our phone, and taking some time in the morning just for some peace and quiet time to kind of like adjust to our senses, stuff like that, and just like maybe sip on our tea or whatever, hear the sounds outside, whatever it is, everybody's different. Taking a walk, and like it just everyone's different. So I think taking that pressure off is really important. I think a lot of times we can pressure ourselves to feel that there's just one way to do it, and then really be hard on ourselves if we're not able to maintain that perfectly. And I think that sense of perfection can also create a lot of, anxiety, and feel like we're like letting ourselves down and just gonna fail. So there's this kind of element of um I think control that we have to be kind of careful of, and know that we have to just see what works for us. We're all different.
Stephanie, I'd like to add here on this part where
Yes.
it says, how do I adult? I
Yes.
see these two extremes, in my experience. One is like hyper individualistic, like I got to do it by myself. I can't get anyone else to help me. Like, I'm the strong person, like this kind of tough. Actually, that was kind of my experience, machismo. Like, I can't ask for help, right? That's a sign of weakness. Especially, there's been these studies
Mhm.
that show like first generation students hesitate more to ask to talk to their counselors, to get mental health services, to ask like the TA for help. Like we're a little bit scared. We feel like we need to be this tough, rugged individual. But then that same study pointed out that people who, especially like white Americans who their parents have already been to college, like they're very assertive about their needs, right? Like I need this, I need that. Like they talk to their counselor, they talk to their teacher. They know it's not only about them, but like that this university is there to serve them. They see themselves kind of like you know, the university is providing a service and I'm the client, so you should help me. Like I'm the client here, right? And you need to do this. But for some of us that are not kind of used to that way of navigating the system, we think we have to do it all on our own. And that's one extreme, this hyper individualistic, machista kind of like way of doing studying, managing time, and being an adult, right? I can't ask for help because if I ask for help, I'm not a real adult. And as we're like 18, 19, 20 years old, we feel this sense of wanting to assert our individualism, right? Our being an adult. And we feel that if we ask for help, it undermines our new status as an adult. Then there's the other extreme of like hyper codependent, right? Where like you want your mommy and your daddy to still do everything for you. Like, oh, mom, can you talk to my teacher? Oh, mom, can you do this for me? And,
Mhm.
you kind of like never gain any autonomy. And then when those resources are not there, you don't thrive. You don't do well, right? And sometimes this in university, it looks like you get attached to like a group of friends too much, right? Like you were saying, Stephanie, and you have to do everything that they do when they do it. And that
Mhm.
messes up your own thing because you might need to do your own things. Or for some
Right.
people, they get in a relationship, right? So your
Mhm.
partner, you become hyper, like you like kind of almost like a small T trauma bonding, right? Small T, not big
Yeah.
trauma, but like small trauma
Mhm.
bonding because you're in a hyper stressed environment. And that just
Exactly.
leads to like very toxic relationships too, right? So we need
Mhm.
to be very careful when we gain this new status, this new privilege of being an adult, right? Not to go into this hyper individualistic where I have to do it all by myself, no help. Help is a
Right.
sign of weakness. And the other one where it's like I'm not willing to cut the umbilical cord, like I'm completely enmeshed in my relationships. And I can't do what I need to do to thrive as an adult in university without all these other people. Those other people will not always be there. So we need to find this delicate balance, right? And we're going to be always swaying. We're always going to be swaying from one side to another. So we just need to be aware of these kind of two extremes when it comes to being an adult.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah. And a lot of times, like you said, like sometimes like I've seen some of my patients even say like, my mom worked hard and I need to like make sure that I do everything on my own and like work hard and like, you know, do school like really well, and like, like that pressure to do everything right and just on their own, and just kind of like, you know, um, it becomes like that feeling of like, yeah, like doing it on my own and not asking for help, and I think that can be like, can be burnt out really quickly doing that. And then on the other end too, like feeling like, yeah, you can't really trust your intuition, and feeling like you need that constant reassurance or support, right? Where we don't trust our intuition when it comes to like making decisions, or, you know, feeling confident in them. Yeah, which, yeah, it takes time to find that balance.
That was my way of sneaking in Buddhism, the middle way. Avoid the two extremes.
Yes, exactly. There we go. You're right. So this is I love this matrix. It's called the Eisenhower matrix. It's super cool because it's like it's an easy visual to just kind of look at and remember. But basically it just just kind of helps you prioritize your to-do. So, a lot of times we can have a to-do list and we're so overwhelmed, we feel like, oh my gosh, I have to do everything on this list, and we might not take a second to maybe think like, do I need to do everything on this list right now, or is this something I can wait till later, and it can be very stressful. So the first box shows urgent and important, so tasks that are like high priority, things that we want to tackle first. Second box is not urgent or important, we can decide, so we can like maybe schedule them later, different date or time. So maybe then like looking at like different date or time in your schedule, maybe in that week, if you're just like doing like an overview, like let's say on Sunday, if you're kind of looking at it like, okay, maybe I'll put this on Wednesday, or Thursday, I have free time here, so just kind of doing a little like overview, like kind of check in with yourself. And then the third box is delegate. So, if there's an opportunity for you to be able to delegate these urgent and not important tasks, we can delegate them maybe to someone else, instead of us doing them ourselves. And then if it's not urgent and not important, we can delete them. So just don't do them right now at all. And we can just free up that space for something, just in general, free it up so we don't have this overwhelming list. And so yeah, a lot of the stuff we've briefly mentioned in the past slides, but just wanted to kind of dive in a little deeper with this one. A lot of times we can care a lot about what people think, and that's not even just in college setting, right? And just in general. So we wanted to really bring to our attention in this presentation that, like, sometimes we can, in terms of like our decision making in terms of college, and like what major, what career and stuff like that, a lot of times we can care about what our family, friends might think, and it can influence a lot of our decision making, and it can even impact how we feel about ourselves, like if we do well or we don't do well, and we can really get hard on ourselves, because we're doing it for everyone else, and I think like a lot of times this type of pressure can be very stressful, and add unnecessary added pressure, on top of what we already go through in school. And so that I like to highlight that there's like, sometimes we have the collective mindset, where that's the priority, versus maybe listening to like what we want to do, so that can impact like our sense of our trust in ourselves, our intuition, kind of feeling like, okay, well, I want to do it this way, but like somebody just told me that they're going to do it that way, and like, or maybe this could be a different better way to do it, and I think I'm gonna do it that way now, you know what I mean? And so we can kind of like throw away maybe our initial idea, because we're just like, whatever. And that's, it's okay for us to have, to hear other opinions, but I think sometimes we can we have to be mindful of getting influenced easily when there may be things that we personally do really want to pursue. um yeah, and so like, you know, a lot of this can create a sense of confusion in our goals, um whether it's career goals, any, you know, any type of goals, or even something as simple as, you know, fitness goals, you know. And you know, this kind of sense of like, you know, caring a lot about others and what they think and stuff like that can help, you know, really impact how we view our identity. And so, you know, it can make us feel kind of lost, you know, and kind of feel like, well, who am I? You know, I know what my family wants, I know what my friends, how my friends see me and what I've what they're doing, but what do I want, you know? And so that can leave us feeling really confused. And so little takeaway, I think, you know, it's really important to just kind of like notice what we do want, you know, and just kind of sit with that for a moment, because sometimes there's something there, you know, and we might not act on it right away, but maybe we'll act on it in the future. And so I think it's really important for us to just notice the different voices that, you know, whether it's the voice coming from our family, the voice coming from ourselves. And if we're kind of finding that there's a little bit of a battle there, you know, maybe just taking a step back to see like, you know, how do I want to proceed with this moving forward?
And Stephanie, I wanted to add this thing about caring about what others think. You know, most of the
Mm-hmm.
people that we meet throughout our lives, we'll never see them again.
Yes.
Most of the people that you went to high school with, you'll never see them again. Most of the
Mm-hmm.
people that you go to college with, you'll never see them again. Most of your friends, you're going to end up losing them too. You're not going to keep
Right.
the same group of friends. So we need to have this kind of realistic perspective that places how much we invest or how much we value these opinions, right?
Yep, I agree.
The opinions of these people are fleeting. Like they
Mm-hmm.
might be your friends one day, not the next day, one week, not the next week, one semester, not the next semester. You might not see them in the same class again. So like don't think it's so like important what these people think about you, right? Like who are they? Think, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just a stranger that happens to be in the same place at the same time as you, right?
Right.
Just because someone's your classmate doesn't mean that they're your best friend, right? And things like that. So let's just keep this big perspective of like the reality that this person is not that much of an influential person in your life. In that moment, it might seem like it because you're in a highly stressed environment and you're very sensitive to other people's feedback, right? The social pressure
Mhm.
of what's
Right.
going on. But even your professors, you might not ever see that professor again. Like you just had him for that one class. Like so, you know, take everything people say to you with a grain of salt and measure it against those relationships that are long lasting, right? So compare the opinion of people in your school or your friends or your job with the opinion of your family members who are going to be there basically until you die or until they die, right? They're going to be there for a long time. So those opinions are a bit have more weight to them than these ones that you have at school or that you have with your professional colleagues. You know, my mom always gave me this advice. It doesn't translate that good into English, but it's basically like if they don't support you, then you shouldn't care, right? So like if they're not feeding you, if they're not clothing you, if they're not there for when you're crying and you're in pain, then like who are they? Like what does their opinion matter if they're not there when you really need them, right? And they're not there every day for you. So sometimes as young people, we forget that we want everyone to like us, right? We want to be nice to everyone. You don't have to be nice to everyone. You don't have to be liked by anyone. Actually, sometimes to be disliked is the best thing, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that we have to be mean and a jerk and be cruel. But yeah, you don't have to be liked by everyone. This is not a popularity contest, you know, that we're going into in college and university. Although it seems like it, right? It's about who are you important to, right? Like, and who likes you? It should be those people who you have very deep ties to. Their opinion should matter to you more, right? Than the people who you just come across with here and there. So I just want young people to remember that because sometimes we overvalue people's opinion who are not really anyone important to us in our life.
Oh, 1,000%. And yeah, when you said that last thing, actually, I remembered something where just even like thinking back on some of the people, like, you know, my roommates or people that like were, I guess you could say the popular crowd, or, you know, the people that were intimidating, you know. And you know, I just think about it, and it's like now looking back, you know, like I realized like, everybody, we're all here, we all are figuring ourselves out. Nobody knows themselves like 100%. Even us now, we're still learning about ourselves, so to say we know about ourselves like completely, or we're super confident all the time, or perfect, like there's no such thing, and I think like if we just come from that standpoint of like, nobody has it all together, and so in that case, like what we see sometimes on the outside isn't necessarily what's happening on the inside, and so just kind of keeping that in mind, that like, sometimes we want to, impress and, feel like everyone's watching us, or like that we have to maintain a certain type of status quo, or, whatever it is, and, image and stuff like that. But at the same time, like a lot of the people that are even maybe doing that are also having their own insecurities too, that maybe we're not aware of, so I think like each of us, like, it's not really about what we look on the outside. Sometimes even the most confident looking people could be really struggling with their confidence, and like actually have like really low self-esteem, and we may not even know it, so yeah, I agree, like it, you know the influences of others, it's like um taking it with a grain of salt, it completely is very, very important. And healthy boundary setting. So with that, so boundary setting, when we talk about that, we typically can think of boundary setting with others, but we also can set boundaries with ourselves too. So I'll start with that, with self. Sometimes in college we can have this sense of like, all work, no play. I'll just work hard, get through it, and then just like have a lot of fun at the end, and kind of have this like really interesting balance there. I mean, not, there's no balance there, but very, interesting way of approaching it. But some people do it, and it can be really, really harmful for us, if we're kind of doing it either that way or the other way, even where it's like all play, no work, and so just, finding that balance where we can set boundaries with ourselves, where it's like, okay, maybe um knowing that like we don't want to get ourselves just to that point of burnout until we get to take breaks, or then that's the point where we actually do take breaks. And I've seen that a lot, where people will just, work so hard, and then, kind of finally take a break only when they've gotten to that breaking point. And then that's when, and again, it goes back to that whole idea of like glorifying that working hard and not stopping type of mentality. So, again, it's unproductive, right? And so a lot of times we think that like it's a good thing, but it's actually not really helpful at the end of the day. It can work sometimes, sure, but it doesn't always, like long term, it's not good for health and well-being, especially when things don't work out the way we plan. Sometimes like maybe we'll work hard, and then somehow we don't do well on some exam or something like that, and then we'll get so hard on ourselves. So sometimes it's like really being able to find that balance is key in terms of, um having boundaries even with others. So like in terms of saying no, like, like, hey, I'm sorry, like I have to do this, I have to study or whatever, and that's hard to do, right? But at the same time, it can really be helpful to find that balance, and to also like surround ourselves with people that will understand that. And I think that's what I kind of wish I also thought about, like in school, like who are the people that are surrounded by me, in terms of like, are they supporting my success here, or are they hindering it? Are they making it, more challenging, and not respecting my boundaries when I set them? So, those are some things to think about. And here's a great chart on boundary setting, which actually I put the link at the end as well for you all. It's from a website called therapistaid.com, super great website. And this basically shows you, like, this can be used for like many parts of your life, not just college, but just in any relationships in your life. And so like if you notice yourself like kind of in any of these other columns, the porous or the rigid boundaries, maybe you might think, okay, how can I do the healthy version of this boundary, So if it's maybe let's say having difficulty saying no to others, and then think, okay, what's the healthy version of that? The ability to say no when needed. And then the rigid version of that is saying no to others most of the time. So, it helps to have that perspective of the different types of boundaries, because sometimes we might think the boundaries we're setting are healthy and they might not be. And, maybe we're just we have those boundaries set for whatever reason, maybe because of our personal experiences, or maybe we just never learned how to set them, So I think just having this chart can be helpful as like a little bit of a guide.
Okay, so preparing for college, before college and during college. So here I just wanted to share just some highlights, some key points or some tips and tricks that we can use, and some things that will help us kind of just kind of look at, in general, in a very general kind of perspective, some of the things that might be useful for us, right? When we're trying to prepare for the college experience. I'm gonna be very sincere. I'm super guilty of like not doing half of this, right? One, because my parents didn't know anything about it. Two, because like all my friends had already gone to college by the time I went to, so they were like doing their own things, and I wasn't going through that experience with them at the same time. Plus, I was like in the military, and like I was prioritizing that over school. But looking back and looking what helped other people thrive, I'm like, oh wow, these are like really important things that would help someone when they're about to start going to college, right? To university. So especially now with the technology we have now, joining an online community of peers, right? Like finding like-minded people who are going through the same thing. I think that's one thing that's really shined through the pandemic, is our ability to connect with others and actually use social media in the way that it was intended to be used, right? Not as a marketing tool, but as a way of bringing us together and forming these groups. I mean, this group itself, right? The Sri Lankan Buddhist wellness community is trying to do that, build an online community of peers to help each other. So that I think is a very important tool that we have nowadays, that back in, when did I go? 2003, there was online communities, but it was a lot different and not as accessible or as fun or as aesthetically pleasing to the eyes that it is now. Another one is check for the requirements that for your declared major, right? Like some of us are like, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that, but we don't know like what this specific school and this specific program kind of needs. And we just start taking the classes that our friends take. Don't do that, don't just take classes because your friend's in there. But be very clear about what you need to take. Also talk to your counselor, or try to get all the information that you need to help you thrive and set up your classes in a way that's most beneficial for you when you first show up in your first semester. Apply for scholarships and FAFSA. You should be doing that as a senior, right? Like all of these, have all these things in mind. I feel like we're in a really good place about this now. Most people kind of in school and high schools and parents really know about this, but just to put it out there, here's something that people neglect. Clean your room. Go through all your stuff in your room before you go to college, right? Instead of like, hey, mom, I forgot this. Hey, dad, can you bring this? Can you bring that? Or you see your roommates and you're like, oh, I should have brought that. Like, do an inventory. Go through your room, like tear everything down, see what you need, see what you don't need. This is actually a perfect opportunity to to throw away those things that you've been hoarding for a long time, right? And prioritize the things that you need, or maybe give away things that you don't use that often, right? And also there's some weird feeling that you get about cleaning your room that makes you feel good also, right? And it's gonna help you do all these other things too. Get a medical checkup, right? Before you go to schools. You want to know like what your well-being is, your health, your physical health and your mental health. So if you do have a therapist, also check in with them, right? And so I think it's very important that we all kind of make a real good analysis of our own well-being, because we're going to be under a lot of pressure. And if we have any underlying conditions, that's going to lower our threshold, of the pressure and the stress that we can take. Catch up with friends before going to school. As I said, most of the people that you meet in high school, they're not gonna be your long-term friends. So kind of, enjoy these last moments you have with your high school friends, because they won't be your friends or your neighbors, because you might not see them if you move away for a long time. So kind of enriching your life is an important thing that you want to do before going to college. Go to the student orientation. I mean, it's not difficult. It's basically a field trip. Go get that thing done before. I know a lot of places offer it even like many months before. Some of them offer it like a few weeks before, or like when you first show up. So get it done. I know it seems kind of like boring, or like I shouldn't do it, or you feel kind of embarrassed, but just go. You know, you never know when you're going to need some of that information, and you might network with like the people who are showing you around, these students, right, that show you around campus. Like that's a good opportunity to meet someone who's already been there for a long time. Get in touch with your roommate, right, or student liaison, whoever's like. Sometimes now they give you like a buddy when you show up to college, right? So get in touch with them. Really make sure you use that resource that you have available to you. Where in the past it wasn't so easy to have someone, an insider or someone who's more experienced, to connect with them. Usually it had to be all awkward, like you had to go to some event and try to make friends there. But now many schools assign someone to you that you can talk to. So please take advantage of that resource. And also look at all your paperwork, all your documents. Make sure you have a good valid ID, valid passport. Make sure you have your social security card. Make sure you have your driver license, insurance. Make sure you have your birth certificate. All these things that, when just come into your head when you're laying in bed out of nowhere, like, where is that? Where's that thing, right? Like, where's my high school diploma? Where did I see it last? Make sure you have all your documents, everything that you need, your vaccinations, your medical insurance card, right? In case something happens, you can able to access your medical providers, the things that they can help you out with. So just make sure that you have all your paperwork, all your documents, everything with you, so you don't freak out when you need them. You don't want that unnecessary stress. Some study tips right here. Again, honest, notorious at not following all of these, but there's some that are really helpful. So getting organized, it's so important to get organized. I would say that most of my difficulties with studying and getting good grades were not about had to do with not being organized. And once I learned how to get organized, it made everything so much better. And getting organized is a good way to help you prevent procrastination and doing everything at the deadline, right? Like breaking up every task into these small things and picking out times throughout the day and the week that you can do the things that you need to do. Don't skip class. I know it's cool. It's not like high school. You're paying for it. Your parents are paying thousands of dollars to go to school, like it's expensive. It's your time, right? Like, don't skip out on it. Just go. If anything, just to be there with other students, make it a social event, but just go to class. Take notes, right? It can be just like on your laptop. You can write them down. You can share notes. You don't have to write everything down. But for me, note taking was key because I'm not good with flashcards. I'm not good with other ways of studying. So I really like to look at my notes, and that's the main way that I study. And then I also reread the chapter. But for me, taking notes was one of the key things. And if you write everything the professor says, that's not taking notes, that's transcribing. So we don't want to transcribe, we don't want the full lesson, just key things that you hear the professor's voice, it actually goes louder or it pitches when something's important. Everyone does that when they talk, their voice will change. So you can listen into that and make a note of those times where the professor's voice kind of goes up, or he heightens it, or he puts an emphasis on what he's saying. Talk to your teacher, talk to your TA, ask questions, right? If anything, they'll know who you are. And it's been shown that if a teacher knows who you are, they're more generous in their grading. So please talk to your teaching, your TAs. You'll get better grades because they'll be like, oh, that's a nice person. I know them. I know they tried hard. Or if you don't show up to class, or if you turn in an assignment late, they'll be more generous. So talk to them. Space out your studying. You don't want to cram. Those cram sessions that Stephanie was talking about are not good. They don't help you study. They're not good for your physical health. They're not good for your mental health. And they're just an excuse to eat junk food and do other things like take energy drinks. So you don't want to do that. Please avoid that. Space out your studying, especially writing papers. Like try to write a page every day instead of like trying to write 10 pages the night before. I mean, that's probably one of the worst things you can do. It's just too much stress. Create a study plan, right? If you have an exam coming up, and you can always, a study plan is like a living document, right? Every time you study, you should be revising it and tweaking it and making it work for you. It shouldn't remain the same because the way we study changes as we get better. Don't just reread, but study, right? So don't just like, sometimes when we read, we can go through a whole chapter and not even remember what we read, right? So make sure that you're actually focused, and it's like you're not too tired, you're not over caffeinated when you study. You have to be in a good place when you study, or there's not too much stimulation around you. So make sure actually that you get the most out of your time when you're actually reading or rereading. Find a quiet place. I mean, you can throw on some nice like headphones to cancel out the noise, or do whatever you need to do to find a place that creates the right causes and conditions. Here, Buddhism again, right? The right causes and conditions are very important for wholesomeness, even for studying. Finding a study buddy, a real study buddy, someone who wants to study and not just like chit chat and gossip or play video games with you, you know, and level up your characters on the side. But yeah, someone who's really interested in studying, and that might be difficult because most everyone just kind of wants someone to vent with or someone to commiserate with them. Find someone who actually is trying to study and test yourself, right? That's very important. That's the one way I found a useful way to use flashcards. I can't use flashcards to memorize things, but I can use flashcards to, at the end, after I finish studying, to test myself, you know? So that's another good thing you can do. Test yourself. You can have your friends test you too. Or there's even like these programs now, I forget what they're called, where like you can put in a question and write the answer, kind of like virtual flashcards, and you can make a little test for yourself online. Self-care. I'll let Stephanie take this one and I'll jump in later.
Yeah. Oh, and also for that study space thing, I was gonna say, yeah, sometimes like um it can be actually, can you go back a slide if
Yes,
you don't
yes,
mind?
yes.
There's something in there that I wanted to mention.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Oh, yes. Yeah, sometimes, we can I think, when we get overwhelmed with a lot of stuff to do, I think it can be helpful just to even say like, okay, I'm just gonna do one thing out of the things, you know what I mean? Because sometimes like maybe we have like a lot of schoolwork to do and we get overwhelmed and then may not do anything right from that list because it's so just stressful. So like I think, just reminder for you guys, like, if there's like those days where we're just not feeling good, not maybe just sad or in a bad mood or tired even, like, okay, well maybe I'll just take a break and then just do one thing out of the list, just one, and I think just like allowing ourselves to do that, because it's better than zero, right? So at least even just having that, and um like just knowing like your study style is key too, because like everybody's different, and even the spaces that you want to study in, like it might not be the same for everyone, right? So I think just like knowing what works for you and what you need is key, and changing it up sometimes, like getting up, stretching, and doing things like that, it can be really helpful. And I wish I change it up a little bit sometimes, because everyone, we have different needs at different times. So, and that leads into self-care, which is oh, actually, I'm sorry, next slide. Actually, I think this was a repeat slide, but I will talk about self-care briefly. Self-care, sorry, that was a little bit of a repeat, but self-care, we all know self-care is important. And I think like self-care, I'm sure Bhante can talk a lot about his experiences with self-care too. I think, we sometimes might feel like we don't have time for it, and we might say, oh, well, I don't have time for it. I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to take a break, and stuff like that. And I think that like, incorporating that into our schedule, even if that's like just 10 minutes a day, or yeah, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, in the morning or whatever that might be, it really gives us that fuel to recharge ourselves, that time alone away from everything else. And to kind of go with this as well, like with this slide, sometimes, we might think that screen time, social media is the self-care. And yeah, sometimes it can be, sometimes like we might play games and stuff, and that's okay. Like there are some brain games, like, that can be really like engaging and helpful for us, right? And those are great ones to play, like if you're like just taking a little break, here and there. But I'd like to encourage, even just listening to things like podcasts and stuff like that, where you know, kind of stimulate the mind. Brain games are great too, of course. But I think sometimes when we're just like, you know, scrolling mindlessly, we might lose track of time, and you know, we might think of that as self-care, but at the same time, you know, lose track of time completely, and then feel really drained actually, because there's a lot of information coming at us, a lot of like, you know, sometimes it might bring up certain triggers within us, like, oh, like I wish I was on this vacation instead of here, you know, or like, you know, I wish I was doing this instead of that, you know, or whatever. And just like, there's a lot of information there, and sometimes it can be a distraction, you know, obviously keep us away from um you know, the things we need to do, but also like it can affect our emotional well-being, our mental health, you know, and even just like our relationships too. You know, we might end up you know, ignoring people around us, or um it might influence like how we view our relationship, maybe if it's like a romantic relationship versus other relationships, or maybe with friendships, like, oh, why, you know, do I have not have enough friends and this person does, you know, or like I feel alone. And it might even increase like that sense of loneliness too, like in what we call like the FOMO, right? Like the feeling of missing out. And so I'd like to encourage, you know, um like being mindful of your social media use. You know, it's not that you have to completely remove your social media, but you know, being creative with like your self-care, you know, and thinking of other ways to like um get away from, you know, the screens, and just take some time to just sit with yourself and your emotions too, and find ways to release it as well, you know. And that can be like journaling, that can be like going on a walk, that can be going on a walk with a friend even, you know, listening to music and walking. Any type of release is really helpful, so I like to encourage that type of feeling of like a release, you know. Like, so if we have a lot of stress, like for example, if we think about it in like medical terms, like if you're kind of like feeling sick and you need to like, sorry to gross anyone out, but you know, throw up, like you need to get it out, right? So it's my favorite example. But you know, it's same thing. It's kind of like with self-care, you know, if we have that daily self-care routine going on, like if it's like, even if it's 10 minutes a day, right? Like I said before, like we are then going to be a lot more resilient in times where the stress is really, really high and something really big happens, because then it's like we're not coming from that space of like, I'm already at my limit, and then something happens and then I'm already capped out. So it's like if you think about my bottle over here, if it's like I'm already at the top here, it's like there's no more room, you know. And so I think like if you think of it in the sense of this bottle, like, you know, the self-care like allows us to keep this space, you know, open, so that there's room for more to go in, and so that we're not like capped out all the time and burnt out, and then there's no more room left. So, you know, it keeps us more resilient, and just allows us to face stressors a lot better, like when random life things happen, right? So just some tips
Stephanie, I
there.
think one thing that's important when it comes to screen time, and I think is kind of
Hmm.
taboo for people to talk about, is adult content, especially for men.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
adult content, I mean, really plays a significant role when it comes to how much screen time and how people cope with stress, especially for young men.
Right.
You know, these
Hmm.
streaming and websites where there's a lot of adult content. A lot of men find that as a way to cope with
Hmm.
social stress or relationship stress, or maybe the lack of intimacy in their lives, right? And things
Hmm.
like that. So yeah, it's not only about playing video games or about mindless doom scrolling through TikTok and Facebook, but also be very careful. You know, this might be the time where you have a your own space where you feel comfortable enough at looking at adult content, and that has a place in for people, right, in their lives. But it can also be misused just like anything else, right? And especially for young men, uh, there's so many statistics about how adult content really pulls in young men, and nowadays is being used more than ever as a coping mechanism. So that's also another way, you know, that people misuse the internet, how they spend so much time on their screen, and yeah, just not proper using of technology, right? And not being really aware of the dangers of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like numbing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
where I've had a lot of my patients say like they sometimes even feel um paranoid because of like maybe their relationships, and like kind of, checking if their partner is up to no good, and just like over checking, and it can bring up a lot of insecurities, right? Or even if it's not a relationship, just like even just looking at other people's social media, like, and us getting so caught up in like things like, did we get, enough likes, on a photo, for example, and stuff like that, or who looked at my story, or whatever it is, um and like I get it, we want to feel like liked, and you know part of a group, and I get that, but I think like sometimes we just want to be, again, it just is all about that sense of awareness and mindfulness about our usage, and also like even just like when it comes to like even starting off of our day, like I've read a lot of articles about not starting the day off with looking at our phone first thing in the morning, and like waiting at least like 30 minutes to an hour. Maybe 30 minutes is, I think, more doable for most of us, and just like not making that the first thing we see, because a lot of times, like, we don't know what notification we're going to have on our screen. It could be something negative, it could be then something bad that happened, or it could be something like a, god knows, but that really sets the tone for the day. It really impacts our mood, how we feel, um, and we're just like adjusting to waking up, you know what I mean? So it's like really important for us to like just kind of take a moment before we, engage with our screens and phones, social media platforms and stuff like that. And a lot of it all honestly is also, aside from just the social media aspect of it, is like just like that feeling of like other people always being in contact with us all the time, right? Like, so maybe like a lot of times, like I remember in college, like everybody's texting me, everybody's messaging me. It feels like I'm always messaging people back, and then it's exhausting at some point, like I just don't want to deal with it. So, and that can be such a time waster. So, like, aside from even just social media, like just having people constantly messaging you all the time, that in itself, like, can be so tax exhausting, and I think like even encouraging like let's say if like your friends want to talk, like maybe just say, hey, can we meet in person, like let's talk over a coffee, like it's better to even have that social engagement like in person, and I encourage that more than anything. Like, how about let's all get together at the end of the week, and let's grab just a round of coffees or whatever, and like just kind of talk, or let's all watch a movie together or whatever, and just kind of have that more of that social engagement versus like us getting so caught up in getting lost in our phone, and then not having the ability to look up and around, it's can get lost in there. So and then this topic we really were passionate about in terms of asking for help, a lot of times we don't want to, right? And we kind of mentioned this earlier in terms of like feeling like embarrassed to do so, or not feeling like we should, or feeling like, well, I should be able to figure it out on my own, stuff like that. And a lot of times, like, when we don't do well, we can feel like it's like the death sentence, like, oh gosh, like I'm gonna get a C or an F, or I'm gonna have to, drop out of this class, and it feels like the end of the world. And I totally understand that feeling. I've been there myself, and I get it. And like, it's not fun. Um, but at the same time, now looking back, like a lot of these things are not, they're not important anymore to me. And I realize that, like, there's always a solution to these things that do come up. And so a lot of times, asking for help, right? Like whether that's talking to a counselor or a professor, or somebody that can, support us through the journey, can be really helpful, because a lot of times we can get into that space of like, oh my gosh, it's like this black mark on my, on my education, and like the history of that, and like just feels like that's it, or like I don't think I can do this career, and we can go to these extremes in terms of how we feel about ourselves as well. and feel really discouraged. And it might just be even like maybe it could just be how the year is for us. Maybe we're just not in the right headspace, or maybe the professor is not the right professor. There could be many factors, right? But I think it's just about us taking a step back and not seeing it as just like there's no way out. And there usually always is, there's always a plan B, C, D, E, F, all the way up to Z. So there's always options. And also, like what we mentioned earlier in terms of like first generation versus non first generation students, a lot of times we may not want to ask for support or admit that we need help. So like even reaching out to our TAs, or we'll hear in class like the professors saying, oh, if you guys have any questions, let us know. Go to your office hours, and there's usually some like office hours scheduled, stuff like that. And a lot of times, I know I myself included didn't want to go because it was like almost like that feeling of, well, then admitting that I don't know, and then feeling kind of embarrassed that like I didn't know. And or just feeling like, what if that question that I want to ask that I don't understand makes me seem kind of like stupid, kind of like, oh really, that's a no-brainer question, why don't you know the answer to that question, kind of feeling. And I think that like can hold us back a lot of times, where we feel this sense of like, um we're not as maybe forthcoming as maybe um other students that are more uh upfront, and really feel the sense of like, I paid for school, I know what I'm, what I came here for. I want to use all the resources here and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of um us, especially within our culture, we, as students, we can find, this sense of, feel a sense of, I don't want to bother the professors, or I don't want to, kind of let them know that I'm not doing well, and then seem like I don't know everything. And there's this sense of feeling like they might look at us a different way. But it's actually more so like it's a positive thing actually. So I'd like to, encourage you guys to um, really lean into that support, because actually it does create more of that connection with yourself and your professors, and just everyone in and just like your education, you making the most of it, the experience that you have. And you might be surprised with what you might learn. um, and also, just handling, how do we handle failures can be very important, right? So like, how are we treating ourselves when we don't do well? How do we, that's really important, because a lot of times we won't do well in something, like might not get the right grade, that we, or the grade that we were hoping for, and we've worked so hard on this, studying for this test, and we can get really down on ourselves when we don't do well. Or we might even compare to others, and that can be really hard, for us to experience. But really leaning into like showing compassion for ourselves even when we are faced with this type of setback. And I think a lot of this can come from like understanding like, what are your beliefs, like, are is some of this like feeling of disappointment, shame, or like, feeling like I'm a failure, coming from like what we've learned from our upbringing, that like we need to have it, have straight A's all the time, and have it all together? Or is it just our own beliefs, or is it from school? Where does this pressure come from, right? And just understanding that, and knowing where that comes from, and just finding ways to kind of like zoom back a little bit in those moments, and realize like, yeah, it sucks, like accepting, right? Accepting is key. And so accepting that, yeah, I tried my best, I did the best I could, didn't do as well as I would have liked, and I'm gonna work on doing better next time. And maybe thinking like, oh, what could I have done differently? Could I have maybe asked for more help? Could I have maybe gone to the office hours? What could I do differently? And seeing this more like as a learning opportunity versus like a closed door. So I think having that flexible mindset can be very beneficial in that setting especially.
Stephanie, I also wanted to add that asking for help also means like if you're not feeling well, you make a doctor's appointment, that's asking for help. If you're
Yeah.
feeling mental health struggles, like, talk to a therapist, seek some the help of a mental health professional. Also, like if you're feeling like some spiritual problems too, right? Go to the temple, like talk to the monks. Also, I'm happy to hear from you, like you have all these resources. Ask for help from your parents, right? Sometimes we have too much pride. We don't want to ask our parents or mom or dad that we need help, or our brothers or sisters or our family members. So asking for help can look very different, right? Teachers, professors, medical professionals, family, friends, monks, priests, whatever it is, like there's so many ways of asking for help. Even just picking up a phone and calling a hotline or sending a message. Right now they got like these text-based messaging things where you can ask for help if you're going through some struggle. So yeah, when it comes to like self-compassion, just remember, like, especially as Buddhists, we know that we have all these like things that we're struggling with: greed, hatred, and delusion, right? So in a way, we're all like ignorant and delusional, So obviously we're gonna make mistakes. We're not perfect. We're not arahants yet, right? So that's kind of a way that I always look at myself. Like when I don't live up to a certain standard or I make a mistake, well, I'm like, well, of course, I'm not an arahant. I'm not fully awakened. Of course, I'm gonna make a mistake because I have greed, hatred, and delusion. And then I apply that compassion that the Buddha extends to all of us, because we're all in samsara together, right? So of course there's going to be pain and suffering and difficulties. So here I really feel where this Buddhist perspective of compassion, karuna, metta and karuna come in, but we need to be able to apply that to ourselves, realizing, hey, I'm just like all other beings, right? That we're all in samsara together and we're all going through these difficulties. And I should treat myself the way Buddha would treat me. So that's really kind of one of the tools that I use to when I feel like I'm getting overcritical about myself.
I like that. Oh, and with this one, so with community engagement and group activities. So, a lot of times we can think of things we might want to participate in school, like clubs or stuff like that, right? But it can also be helpful to join activities that have nothing to do with school. So, I think this is something that both Bante and I have personally experienced as well. And, I personally know that like I wish I did more of this in my college experience, in terms of engaging in an activity that just allows me to like simply unwind, relax, detach myself from school, and just like um also for it to not be something that um requires me to feel the sense of like there is either a success or failure here. It's just to just have fun, or to just to do, and there is no goal in mind, or competitive nature. I mean, I guess it depends on the activity, but in terms of the activity, just like more so just like an outlet, like something fun, something where you can just kind of like just be yourself and detach from just the other parts of your life, like school or whatever, so that can be really helpful. And also just, it helps us be around other people, right? Because isolation can be really harmful, and just having that ability to have that a different type of engagement with other people, and an activity, like, and it can be even just like where we're just in the same space, and just kind of like doing something together, and that in itself is great. And there's like I remember in school, like there were some like meditation groups and yoga classes and stuff like that. So if like, it's kind of out of budget, maybe just looking into the school, like, and seeing like what are the resources that they provide, and seeing what's kind of available and stuff. But I would highly encourage like doing stuff like that, and or even creating something, right? Like maybe with your group of friends, like creating like a weekly hiking group or something like that, or just like a few friends that get together and just work out, go to the beach and just kind of have fun, and just kind of sit on the beach, lay around, and kind of just do nothing, kind of just chill out, so that way you have a moment to like just feel like there is no expectations asked of me, no, um school things to think about, no, like, just kind of giving our brain a rest. And I think that type of detachment from um you know school can be really beneficial in terms of like preventing like the burnout and all that, because as I mentioned before, that 24 hours, 24/7, like studying can be really, really draining. And so we need that time to just feel like we can just shut down, just no expectations of us, and just kind of take a break to unplug. And lastly, these are some links I wanted to share. This website I actually mentioned before with the boundaries chart, that is on therapistaid.com, and they have some really great articles on that website, as well as psychcentral.com, also great resource. I actually use both of them often for my patients, and they love it. So there's so many, like you can just type in a topic, or there's they actually are organized by like different mental illnesses, and you could just like type in like things like time management, whatever, and it'll pull up a list of things. And also I wanted to mention that sometimes we in college, like we're seeking therapy services, and as Bante mentioned before, like looking into like therapy, like even in school, or just support services, in our community and stuff like that too, right? And sometimes in colleges, like there are uh, counseling services, and usually it's called CAPS. And sometimes they're kind of limited in terms of maybe there's like a waiting list, or maybe you'll have like a few sessions. And so if for some reason like there aren't readily accessible mental health resources in your school, I just wanted to put out there, these are some examples of great therapy platforms that you can look into. And so that's why, and lastly, that one about the insurance. So having your insurance information handy and stuff can also be very good, just, in case you do want to sign up for these services, looking into your insurance provider with your insurance provider to see like, if they can offer that with them, or, use your insurance to sign up for one of these other platforms, or whatever works best for your situation. So lastly, any questions or thoughts? Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, comments, something wasn't clear, now is the time. And also, like, if you're not actively participating right now, please feel free in Facebook or YouTube to write it in the comments, right? If it's not too personal, put it in the comments. And then you can always send us to our emails. I'll post our emails too. So if you're watching this later, actually, our last session that we had, most people watched it later. They weren't live. So I just want to invite everyone who, whenever you're watching this, to reach out to us, right? And share your questions with us. And if they're not too personal, put them in the comments, because sometimes people can identify with what you wrote, and be like, oh, wow, that's just like me. Like there's another person out there who's going through it just like me. And you can be the light for others to see in the dark, as the Buddha said, right? So I just want to put that out there. So yeah, if anyone here in our live audience wants to have any questions or comments, now is the time. Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for this, Bhante and Stephanie. This was wonderful. I just like jotted down some things, and I realized all the things I jotted down have nothing to do with academics. But something that that you can add to the how to prepare for college is something that when I taught at UCLA and UC Berkeley, I would force my students to do around, like, I think the week before like midterm seasons hit. I'd force them to take their phones out and be like, write down these numbers. And one was the CAPS, the Counseling and Psychological Services 24-hour hotline. And the other one was the Counseling and Psychological Services appointment. And having that already in your phone. And something else that I would have the students do was to put, like, on Google Maps or whatever map app that we're using, a pin into the walk-in counseling and psychological services, like whatever that building was.
Oh, wow.
So you already have that information
No.
like not when you're currently in the middle of, you know, a bunch of stress and crisis. You don't want to go searching for things. It's already in your phone. And it can be incredibly valuable. And this is, again, it started, this was actually before classes even started. So I was starting my PhD program at Berkeley. It was like orientation week. I had just recovered from dengue fever, which I had gotten in Sri Lanka. I still had boxes in my apartment that were unpacked, and a tree fell on me. So I couldn't walk. I was taking the disability van everywhere. And I had crutches and like a post-op shoe on my foot. And then I got like a cold, and because I had asthma, it just sort of went into full-blown pneumonia. And I remember calling my mom, and I was like, Ummi, I hate my life. And then Ummi, being, you know, the wonderful woman that she is, was like, why don't you just go into the walk-in counseling hours? And I was like, okay, I'll do that. So then I hobbled my way over on my crutches to the walk-in counselor, and the counselor took one look at me after I had said all of this, and she was like, wow, your life is insane right now. They look at you and be like, yeah, you're overwhelmed because your life is
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
So like it's, you know, it doesn't have to be like you're in the midst of, you know, this major mental health crisis.
Right.
It could be, you know, oh my God, my life is insane right now.
Mhm.
And that's like completely a valid reason to go and see a counselor. And I felt so much better. I mean, like physically, everything was still awful, but mentally I felt so much better after that session. So it can be really valuable. Something else was like going to college for a lot of people. This is like the first time you're away from home. And like you're sort of, it's about not just school, it's about establishing and creating like who you are, without your family, without your like traditional support systems that you've had for the last, you know, almost 2 decades. And sort of bringing it back to Buddhism, something that has been super useful for me for the last like 20 years has been the Kalama Sutra, um, where the sutra in which the Buddha basically says, I'm paraphrasing this, but just because someone says something doesn't mean that you have to believe it. Just because, you know, a respected teacher says something, just because your friends say something, just because everybody else is saying the same thing, just because it's written down somewhere, just because a monk is saying that, just because me, the Buddha, is saying that, doesn't mean that you have to believe it, but you have to examine it. And if it is, you know, beneficial to all people, then accept it and live up to it. And that is part of and it was something that I looked at like literally every day. You know, just because other people are doing it doesn't mean that I have to do this, right? So some of that could be like in sort of their situation. Other things are about, sorry, I feel like I'm going everywhere, but something else that sort of reminded me of what you were saying about boundaries is that boundaries aren't necessarily something that are for other people, they're for you. So because you can't control other people, but you can only control what you do. So when
Totally.
you set boundaries, you have to figure out, in this situation or in a particular situation, what am I going to do? So that could be what you're talking about with respect to, you know, drugs or alcohol. And I thought that was very insightful, you bringing up like pornography, like if there's like a sexual encounter where somebody has only watched porn and thinks that pornography is like what actual sexual encounters look like, which is like not real life.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, I don't want to do this. Like you could just say like, no, thanks, right? To like the drugs or the, you know, or the alcohol or the weird sex, or you could just leave. Right. And that's also something that you can do. And I feel like I didn't learn that in college until like maybe my second or third year, that I could just like leave at, you know, when people were getting drunk and I was uncomfortable because I wasn't really interested in alcohol. Um, but yeah, what was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, yes. Oh, I really love what you said, Stephanie, about like separating school from life.
Mhm.
And for me, what was really helpful is, I starting my second year, I only had jobs, or I made sure to have at least one job that was off campus. Right. So I'd have 2 jobs every year, and one of them was on campus and one of them was off campus. So I was working in a nonprofit, and I was around people who were not college students, who were real adults with real lives, which was like, oh, this is a different perspective. And then I had like extracurriculars that took me off campus, you know, into one of the extracurriculars that I'm thinking about right now. It like took me into like low income and working class neighborhoods around Boston, where, you know, I was talking to, you know, real people who are just kind of going about their lives, and this was in the context of like renters' rights and things like that. But it was like completely, like, it was non-academic. It was something that had nothing to do, it was like non-academic work that had nothing to do with the actual physical space of college. And that really breaks that bubble and insular aspect that college can kind of be. Yeah, that's all I got.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, I like that you gave us a great example of that, because like a lot of times, like just that change of environment takes you out of the like feeling of the pressures that like this is everything, right? Like especially when you're like living on campus and that's kind of all you see all the time, right? And then being able to like hear other people's stories and just, right, like just like real life normal stuff, right? It gives you a change in perspective for sure. I like that. Thank you for sharing all of that. I appreciate all the tips.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, yeah, like I remember like being in martial arts the whole time I was in like school was amazing, because like you get people who are like they're like in their 50s and 60s, and you got like little kids in there, and it's like, oh wow, this is like how the real world is. It's not only like 18 to like 22-year-olds, right? And so that was really good. And then also being in the Air Force Reserve and being part of the military and going to Iraq and Afghanistan while I'm going to college gave like a very different, I prioritize different things, right? Like I'm like, oh man, over here is life and death, and over here is like getting a good grade. Okay, like that's not that important. I'm worried about like not getting killed is more important than like worrying about grades. So that kind of helped me like balance things out. So like that might look different for different people, like joining a club or like getting a job off campus, or you know, doing something else. But I think you definitely need to find something outside of school to give you some perspective about like, wait a minute, this is not the entire world, and like this is academia is not a reality. It's not the reality of what happens out there in the real world. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that whole thing about like the accessibility, those 2 programs, mental health programs for college students, I wasn't aware of them, you know? So like, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a good thing to like let kids know, like young people know, like right away off the bat, like, hey, here you go. Like before we get started, like you got these things, instead of like being reactionary, right? I feel like our society is very reactionary to everything. Like once something happens, then we'll deal with it, instead of being like more preventive. Like, okay, here are all these things before anything happens, right? Like you have all these things available to you. So yeah, that's really awesome. I love it. And yeah, thank you for coming. Unfortunately, I have to go pin the pot soon, pin the pata, arms round within a couple of minutes. So I gotta take off. It's early in the morning here. It's yeah, about to be 8 in the morning, and they go arms around in about 40 minutes in Cambodia.
From one thing to the next.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for everyone. And yeah, we'll keep everyone posted. We'll post most things. My Facebook, Stephanie's Facebook, the Facebook group, on my YouTube, and everywhere, all social media. You'll get more info about the about future things that we'll be doing. So thank you for joining us, and all of you out there watching this in the future. Also, thank you for joining us, and remember to leave your questions in the comments or in the email. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye bye.
Everybody, take care. Bye.